The apartment was silent, not peaceful, quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, almost tangible, pressing down on everything within its reach. The walls seemed to absorb the tension, the air thick with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Thick air hung between Sarah and Michael. It was as if the very atmosphere had conspired to keep them apart, to prevent any form of reconciliation. The room, once filled with laughter and love, now felt like a battleground, scarred by their recent conflict. They sat on opposite ends of the sofa, miles apart. The physical distance was a mere reflection of the emotional chasm that had opened up between them. Each was lost in their own thoughts, replaying the argument over and over in their minds, searching for a way to bridge the gap. The fight had been explosive, words said in the heat of the moment, now impossible to take back. Regret hung in the air, mingling with the remnants of anger and hurt. They both knew that the damage had been done, but neither knew how to begin repairing it. Sarah stared straight ahead, her reflection staring back from the blank TV screen. The silence was deafening, each second stretching into an eternity. She wondered how they had come to this point, how love had turned into something so painful and complicated. Michael finally got up, the rustle of his shirt the only sound. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he was trying to delay the inevitable. He felt the weight of the silence, the burden of the words left unsaid, and it was almost too much to bear. He walked to the window, looking out at the city lights but seeing nothing. The vibrant city below seemed like a different world, one where people were living their lives, unaware of the turmoil that raged within this small apartment. He felt disconnected, isolated, as if he was watching life from the outside. Each breath he took felt heavy, weighted with the fight. The air seemed thicker, harder to draw in, as if the very act of breathing was a struggle. He closed his eyes, trying to find some semblance of calm, but the storm inside him refused to be quelled. He wanted to say something, anything, to break this suffocating silence. But what? Every word that came to mind felt inadequate, incapable of bridging the gap that had formed between them. He hesitated, the weight of his indecision adding to the oppressive atmosphere. The silence stretched on, each tick of the clock a hammer blow to their already fractured peace. Time seemed to slow, each second dragging on, amplifying the tension that filled the room. The clock was a cruel reminder of the time they were losing, time that could have been spent healing. It was amazing, Sarah thought bitterly, how a place meant to be their haven could feel so much like a prison. The walls that once provided comfort now felt like they were closing in, trapping her in a space filled with memories of happier times. She longed for an escape, but knew that running away wouldn't solve anything. Sarah replayed the argument in her head, each sharp word a fresh wound. She hadn't meant most of it, the hurtful jabs, the accusations flung like daggers. It was amazing how anger could twist her words, her intentions, into something ugly. She glanced at Michael. He stood so still, his shoulders slumped. The sight of him, usually so strong, now radiating defeat, pierced her heart. He looked so alone, and the awful realization hit her. She was the one who had put that look on his face. A wave of nausea washed over her. This wasn't them. They weren't a couple who fought like this, who hurt each other with such abandon. Weren't they supposed to be each other's safe harbor, not the storm itself? The aroma of garlic and herbs wafted through the apartment. Michael, without a word, had started cooking. Sarah watched him from the couch, her heart twisting. He moved around the kitchen with a familiar ease, chopping vegetables, stirring pots. It was therapeutic, this unspoken language they shared. She knew what he was making, her favorite pasta dish, the one he always cooked after a fight, a silent apology simmering on the stove. It wasn't just a meal, it was his way of saying he still cared, that he was willing to try. Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat. Such a simple gesture, and yet it spoke volumes. It was a tiny crack in the wall they had built between them, a tiny crack that let in a sliver of hope. The clatter of plates broke the silence. Michael set the table, his movements stiff. Sarah rose from the sofa, her limbs heavy with guilt. They sat down, the aroma of pasta filling the space between them. It was a familiar ritual, this awkward dance after a fight. "It's good," Sarah said softly, breaking a piece of garlic bread. Her voice was small, hesitant. Michael looked up, his eyes searching hers. "Thanks," he murmured. The words hung in the air, fragile as spun glass. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was a start. They ate in silence, but it was different now. The tension had eased, replaced by a tentative truce. Each bite of pasta was a step closer to each other, a silent acknowledgement of their shared history, of the love that ran deeper than any argument. Sarah watched Michael as he ate, noticing the way his hair fell over his forehead, the crinkle at the corner of his eyes when he smiled. It was those little things, those tiny imperfections that made him so perfect to her. Their fingers brushed as they both reached for the water glass. A jolt ran through Sarah, a spark of connection in the shared space. Maybe words weren't needed yet. Maybe this, the shared meal, the silent understanding in their eyes, was enough for now. "Sarah," Michael began, his voice rough with emotion. I am so sorry for everything I said, for the way I acted." Sarah reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "No, Michael, it was my fault. I let my temper get the best of me. I didn't mean any of those things." And it all came pouring out. The unspoken fears, the anxieties they'd kept bottled up, the misunderstandings that had festered in the silence. They were like two dams breaking, words rushing out in a torrent of pain and honesty. But through it all, there was love. A deep, abiding love that had weathered storms before and emerged stronger. As they talked, they listened, truly listened, not just waiting for their turn to speak. They heard the hurt beneath each other's words, the unspoken fears that fueled their anger. They began to understand, not just the fight, but each other. They talked late into the night, the remnants of their meal forgotten on the table. But it didn't matter. They had found each other again, and that was all that mattered. In the quiet aftermath, they made promises. Promises to communicate better, to be more patient, to remember the love that bound them. They knew there would be other fights, other misunderstandings, but they also knew they had the tools to navigate them, to come out stronger on the other side. Later, as they lay in bed, the early morning light casting a soft glow over the room, Michael's arm wrapped tightly around her, his warmth seeping into her skin, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. It was a peace that came not just from the physical closeness, but from the emotional connection they had rebuilt. The fight, now a distant memory, had brought them closer. It had been a storm that tested their bond, but also strengthened it. It had forced them to confront their issues, to speak truths that had long been buried, to peel back the layers and expose their vulnerabilities. They had seen each other at their weakest, and yet they had chosen to stay. They had emerged from the storm battered but not broken. In fact, the cracks had been filled with gold, making their bond even more precious. In fact, they were stronger, more resilient. Their love had been tested and had come out victorious. The silence between them now was no longer heavy with unspoken words, but filled with the quiet comfort of understanding. It was a silence that spoke volumes, but filled with the quiet comfort of understanding. They had learned to communicate without words, to feel each other's presence in the most profound way. They had found their way back to each other, navigating through the maze of emotions and misunderstandings, and in the process, deepened their love. It was a love that had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger, more resilient. The city outside their windows slept, unaware of the battles fought and won within the walls of their apartment. But within the walls of their apartment, a new chapter had begun, a chapter filled with hope, understanding, and a love that had been rekindled. Love had been rekindled, a flickering flame fanned back to life. It was a flame that would burn brighter with each passing day. And Sarah knew, with a certainty that warmed her from the inside out, that their love was not just a fleeting emotion, that their love, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, would only grow stronger with each passing day. It was a love that had been tested and had proven its worth, would only grow stronger with each passing day. Together, they looked forward to a future filled with promise, knowing that whatever came their way, they would face it together.